Hello again, watercolor students. This is part 3 in the video series of an introduction to the earth tone vegetables and fruit project, including wax and salt. So by now you've measured out your warm-up sheet, practiced with your earth tones and the wax and the salt, and have selected your image from that list of pictures that I put on the module. I wanted to talk a little bit about how to go about setting up a gesture drawing. Drawing is by far the most important element of becoming an artist. If your rendering skills aren't solid, no matter how developed you are in other ways, it really shows. So the discipline of drawing and rendering and making things accurate and working from observation is going to be a theme throughout any class that you take. There are some classes like design where you don't use drawing skills quite as much, but the whole concept of composition and unity and variety, it plays throughout any studio art practice. But a lot of times you start out with a grid when you're beginning to get things where they go, but as you move forward you want to start working more from life and direct observation, even if it's an image, without figuring out based on square by square where things go. So we're going to practice a little bit of line gesture, which is really a good thing to do before you even start working with your watercolor paper. If this gesture drawing turns out really, really well, you can transfer it to your paper really lightly with that method of rubbing the pencil on the back. But ideally you want to get so comfortable practicing drawing your subject that you'll be able to lightly draw it onto your watercolor paper. The first thing I want to do, I just picked this bowl of olive oils, brine, just because I love repetition, and there's some opportunities here for highlights. There's glass, there's a variety of value, and I'll find places to sneak in more earth tones, pure color, wax, and salt too. Before you even start sketching, you want to figure out the general scale of your image. I don't have a printer, so I didn't print this out. This is just on an iPad. But whatever size I start with, whether it's here, 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 I want to get a general sense of the shape of the paper, the picture plane, because my paper is 18 by 24, but you can tell that this, and a lot of times in a phone, it'll be very rectangularly long. So a good kind of rule of thumb, let's just take a ruler and get a general sense of what it is. It can be a little bit off, but you want to have a way to crop your paper. So I measured here 4.5 by 6. So I want to kind of triple that so that I have a good size picture, but that I'm not off in terms of the rectangle shape. So I always like to do a little math on the side, and I would just go 6 by 4.5. If I multiply both by 3, that makes 18 by 13.5. So that gives me a general sense. And then I can just go, okay, this is going to be 18 generally. Of course, it's better to use a T-square. But if I make this 18, I can kind of know that my picture is going to be from there over to here. So when I start sketching, I can get a sense. And then it traveled up about 13.5. So here's 12. And then a little more up there. So this is going to be it. So I know that when I start drawing in my picture, I'll move this forward a little. I think you can see that. Yeah. The top of it is up here. Let's make it darker. And of course you can do horizontal or vertical compositions. Mine's horizontal, and what I'm going to start doing is really, really loose gesture. And I'll try to put this so that you can see it and watch me draw. I guess I'll just put it here. I don't know. So you always want to hold the pencil really loose, ideally standing on an easel. But since a lot of people don't have easels at home, you can do it flat, but you want to use your entire arm. And with an ellipse like this, what you realize is it travels from this end all the way over to here, and it travels all the way from the bottom to the top. And another thing that's really important is that organic shapes are actually structural geometric shapes. It's like in a figure drawing, you break everything down into building blocks. You don't want to start out with a round shape. You want to get the structural position. You can always go back and round it out at the end. But it's the structure of a drawing that matters more than anything. If you have the surface, it's just like a layer of skin of fancy textures and filling and shading, and it might look good at first glance, but really it has no structural integrity if it doesn't have that block by block build-up process. So instead of doing a grid, I can just visually think about what's about halfway and then kind of picture what's about halfway here. And it's also a great tool for getting an ellipse, because you can see, you know how ellipses get steeper as you go down and flatter as you go closer to your eye level? You can determine where that point starts along here. It's higher up. It's not in the middle there. So that will help me kind of structurally get this circle shape. And when you go to do your ellipse, you want to really loosely over and over and over and over. That's a gestural line. People always do these lines like this. And somehow they think it's going to be accurate, but humans are not accurate, so that's why we do a lot of moves. So I'm sort of looking at my whole composition. I want to start looking at the way things move here. Do you see how this thing, that little metal piece on the side, is angled like that? And then you've got a leaf angled like that, and then you've got a stem angled like that. So you have, whoops, you have this angle, and this, and this, and this, and then you have triangles in here. You have highlights that are a little bit edgy. They're not all rounded. And the olives themselves, parts of them go into the liquid and are structural. So instead of me doing just a round shape here, I would start to build up the structure. So I'm going to start building from big to small here. It's going to be hard to see, but I'll just put it right here and you can get a sense of what I'm doing. All right. So I'm considering the whole composition here. The best way to draw is to draw the space around. See how I'm getting the angle? I'm getting the angle here and here and here, and then I'm going to get the shadow angle. I'm working on all the movement and positioning because those are all going to be key anchors for me later. You want to look at the negative space first, the shape around things, the shape between things. That's the key. If you draw the negative space right, the positive space draws itself. So over this area, put it here, I'll just do one area at a time. So I'm over in here and I'll prop this up with my salt from the other one. So over in this area, you can see there's a brown triangle shape here. And I'm more concerned about the way it moves sideways. So I'm going to put a gestural line there. Then I have my ellipse shape coming up here. And then I have my border here. As I go up here, I'm going to start to see that angle here. And I'm trying to get the angle right. It's a little bit steeper. And then I have this kind of shape there. This angle here. So you want to really be loose and messy. It's better to make a mess and clean it up later than to be all organized at the get-go, because then it's always off. So it's going to be hard to see, but I'm going to keep blocking in. Another thing that really helps is as you go, put some of the values in there. And you can just smear them, just so you know where they are, because that helps you draw the rest as well. And I can look and see that this black one is about halfway, sticking up a little, down a little bit below. So if my halfway point is here, the middle's here, that's going to be about in here. And instead of drawing it like a circle, I'm drawing it structurally. Because it's three-dimensional form. And the angles of it are more important than the shape around it. Shape is the least important thing. Surface across is better than distance around. That's why cross contour is so helpful when you're setting these things up. Because I'm starting to get to know these things. Even if my drawing is just preliminary, I can see that this moves this way, cross contour. So I can, while I'm doing this process, I can also do some cross contour lines as well as tone the value. And I can start figuring out where this hits along here and what else does it run into. Is it enough further over? When does this thing pull in here? What's the distance between? Do I need to make it bigger? And I'm just playing with this. I just met this subject. It's going to take me time. I'm going to draw it many times. Big, loose, large placement. All of this is called organizational drawing. You want to get a feel for how things move, how they are in relation to each other, how big they are, how they differ in value, and you're getting insights as you go. And when you make mistakes and they're in the wrong place, this is a great time to fix it. If you wait till you spend hours and hours on a drawing and you get to a place where you just can't get off of it, you're not willing to make corrections because you put too much into it. That's why this is the time to do it. Once you get something rendered correctly and it's in the right spot, it can become an anchor. And then you can draw everything else related to that. The thing with drawing and painting is if you have one thing that's off and you fix it, which you should, because that's responsible, you never want to be lazy and kind of try to cover it up. When you do that, you realize that everything else is off. So you have to be willing at any time to redo your entire painting and drawing. Anytime. The great thing about doing this really wet, but messy, is that when we do get into the wet media, it'll be so crisp and delicate and assured of itself that you can focus on watercolor techniques. There's no way to get to the watercolor technique without dealing with the drawing. Ideally, when you become really solid as a watercolorist and someone who can render well, you don't use pencil at all. But you still practice. You still get a familiar sense of your subject. So little by little, I'm building this shape and I'm figuring out how it moves, and I'm deliberately not focusing on what it is. The subject never matters. Everybody wants to paint a figure and an eyeball and, flowers in a jar, and everyone wants to know what it is. Well, it doesn't matter. Because if you get this down, you can draw or paint anything. And it ends up being all about technique. It's not about telling people things as they are. You want to make people work a little. That's the mystery, and that's what separates kind of a crafty artist from an artist. And the more classes you take, it's like you start to see things differently. Even in our class, you start to see how that little delicate edge happens with watercolor and little cauliflowers and all the interesting things that different media do, watercolor in particular. But I'm just studying here. I'm studying, and I'm not focused on total accuracy yet. I'm building towards it. And I don't have the risk associated with drawing something fully and then the rest of the picture is not right. And then you just go, oh, well, I have to. No, you want to just keep going until you get the whole. See, I'm looking at this distance between here. I'm getting to know. So the drawing is going to be key. And if you get comfortable practicing on the gesture, you'll be able to take a very light 2H, 4H pencil and lightly render this onto your picture. If you're really worried about it, you can transfer some of the lines so you don't have to redo this whole thing. But the gesture is great because it's an opportunity to study the underlying structure, the geometry of things, how they relate to one another, what's high, what's low, what's wide, all these little subtle things. And that way when you go to paint, you're going to already have a relationship with your shapes and your values, and it'll be easier to approach. That's why doing a series is always a great idea. You know, like have 4 of these along the wall, each with a different approach, different technique, different mood. And of course, always draw off the edge with gesture. Off the table, off the edge, everything open. Use your whole body. And I'm standing just because I can't deal with drawing sitting. But all these shapes in here are key. And then now, just by doing this, I'm noticing this is like a pool of water. It's like a little riverbed surrounded by flat, calm water. So I can use cross contour on this area, that kind of foggy, shiny area. And I'm starting to think, what can I do with watercolor and to make that really work? So I like to think of things structurally because then I get the angles proper, instead of just making some little balloon shape. Another thing that people do is they sacrifice dimension. If something's going off the edge, they stop short, and then it's kind of deformed. Like even this, if I didn't go off the edge here, I might accidentally make a curve weird. So I stop here, I get a weird edge. I go off the edge, I know that it continues off past my visual. This is just a glimpse of time, and the rest goes off the edge. So slowly I'm building values. This red has a different value than this. It's kind of like a black purple. There's a little like shape in there I want to capture. So I'm really focused on shapes, not on lines. It's a line gesture, but it's also organizational. Sorry, my neighbor's like doing construction or something. So this is the process of gesture drawing. You want to constantly move, be active, figure out where things land, relationships, values, surfaces, how they move, and it starts to come together. It's a process, but that's the first step. I think I'll stop here, and then the next video I will do a light drawing on watercolor paper and start showing you some techniques about how to use the saturation, leaving white, earth tones, wax, and salt. Bye.